Ukraine reports 33 ceasefire violations by Russia. Eastern Ukraine witnesses heavy shelling in the region. U.S. has warned Russia of consequences after NATO refutes Putin troop withdrawal claim. U.S. President Joe Biden has urged Russia now to consider diplomacy and return to the negotiation table. Here is a report.
The Russia-Ukraine standoff shows no signs of cooling. Shelling has continued in eastern Ukraine for the last 48 hours. The Ukraine armed forces have released CCTV images that show attacks on an army checkpoint near the border. The war between Ukraine and Moscow-backed rebels has been going on for 8 years in the Donbas region. The region is witnessing the heaviest fire in years. Ukrainian officials have reported 33 ceasefire violations from Russian-backed forces in one day. Amid the heavy fighting, the Russian-backed separatist leader has announced the evacuation of residents to southeast Russia.
As of today, February 18, a mass centralized evacuation of the population to the Russian Federation has been organized. Women, children, and elderly are to be evacuated first.
Russia has denied any knowledge of evacuations. Meanwhile, the US alleges Moscow is preparing for false provocations to invade Ukraine.
We are deeply concerned that that is not the path that Russia has embarked on, and that everything that we're seeing, including what you've described in the last 24, 48 hours, is part of a scenario that is already in play of creating false provocations.
U.S. Vice President Kamala Harris has warned Russia to face severe consequences if they invade Ukraine.
But we are also committed, if Russia takes aggressive action, to ensuring there will be severe consequence in terms of the economic sanctions we have discussed. And we know the alliance is strong in that regard. And again, I thank you for your leadership as a partner in that effort.
The warnings come after the U.S. alleged that Russia has stationed 190,000 troops in and around Ukraine's border. Earlier, the U.S. had pegged the number of Russian troops at around 1 lakh. If the claims are true, this is the most significant military mobilization since the World War. Russian President Vladimir Putin had declared partial withdrawal of troops on February 15th. But the US and NATO say no big change has been seen on the ground. Russia has rejected the charges by the US and NATO.
The withdrawal has already started. We all saw the footage and got the information released by the Ministry of Defense. It is an extended process. It's clear the grouping for the exercises was built up over many weeks. And it is, of course, impossible to withdraw it in a single day. They can't just take off and fly away. It takes time.
Amid the saber rattling, Russia has released images of military drills in the Black Sea. Ukraine fears the drills are a precursor to an invasion. Bureau Report, India Today.
The Cold War ended decades back, but the recent development at Ukraine border is fast sending us back to those days of the polarized world. On one side, there is the United States of America and NATO. To counter it, Russia is in overdrive to forge alliances. In the meantime, there's been shelling at the line of control in eastern Ukraine. Here's a report.
The Russian Deputy Prime Minister Yuri Borisov is on a three-nation tour of South America. This at a time when Russia seems on the verge of invading Ukraine. First stop Venezuela, and then the Deputy PM on Thursday landed in Nicaragua to meet President Daniel Ortega. The Nicaraguan president went on record to express his support for Russian efforts at peace over the situation with Ukraine.
We express to the people of Russia, we express to President Putin our solidarity and our encouragement in the struggle that the Russian people are waging for peace.
While the Russian Deputy Prime Minister's next stop is Cuba, earlier in the week, another South American president, Jair Bolsonaro of Brazil, was also seen speaking out in support of Russia's stand on peace.
De forma muito especial,
Mr. President, we share common values such as belief in God and the defense of the family. Also, we are in solidarity with all those countries who want to commit themselves to peace.
ao nosso lado. Muito obrigado.
The Brazilian president was in Moscow at a time when the West were warning of Russia's belligerence, escalating the crisis in Ukraine.
Well, unfortunately, we're not anywhere near the end or the beginning of this crisis, which means that we're somewhere in basically a rapidly evolving situation, and I think we're going to be in for the long haul of tensions around Ukraine. So, the basic message is buckle up, because this is going to be very difficult.
Tensions spiked on Thursday along the line that separates Ukrainian forces from Russian-backed separatists in the country's east. Each side accused the other of intensive shelling. Ukrainian military command said shells hit a kindergarten in the town of Stanitsia, Luhanska, wounding 2 teachers.
It was a very powerful explosion, and then we heard the sound of broken glass. The children were very scared. Some kids started crying immediately, and the explosions continued for the next 20 minutes.
The Ukrainian president, Vladimir Zelensky, visiting Ukrainian troops in Donetsk region, tweeted that the kindergarten shelling by pro-Russian forces was a big provocation.
It's important now to clarify for the entire world that these projectiles came from temporarily occupied territories of Ukraine, controlled by Russia, because now Russian propaganda is trying to distort the reality and accuse Ukraine of shelling. We are convinced they will not succeed in doing this.
A side effect of the escalating tensions between Ukraine and Russia has been the rise in price of crude oil and natural gas. Even as Moscow seems to be the aggressor in this crisis, an invasion of Ukraine and the conventional war that is bound to follow might have a larger economic impact on global economy, it is felt. Experts say there are other options that Russia might ultimately adopt to rein in Ukraine, going the Western way.
That Putin has given Russia a whole host of options of things that he can do. So we will not have changed the goals. The goal is of getting a grip on Ukraine, preventing Ukraine from going off on its own independent foreign security policy. But Putin might then choose other options that are before him. Cyber operations, subversive activity. They could try to poison President Zelensky of Ukraine. They've certainly done that on plenty of occasions. One of the other previous presidents of Ukraine, Yushchenko, was poisoned with dioxin.
Despite the increasing crescendo of Western censor, Russia continues to deny any intention of invading Ukraine. Russia, however, has also been firmly reiterating its right to deploy troops wherever necessary to counter NATO threats. And that brings the whole crisis back to Ukraine, where its proposed admittance into the North Atlantic Treaty Organization is what seems to upset Moscow in general and President Putin of Russia in particular.
India today is at ground zero, the eye of the intense Russia-Ukraine standoff. India today's Gaurav Sawant with this ground report. Take a look.
So there may be tension at the borders, but here in Kyiv, celebrations of a graduation ceremony, of a convocation. They've completed their law degrees. These young women will be practicing lawyers from tomorrow. And while they celebrate, there is a little tension that appears to be palpable in the air. They hope for a peaceful resolution of the situation. When we spoke to some of them, they hoped that the matter would be either resolved amicably or legally and not through soldiers at the borders. Of course, tension remains palpably high at the borders, having its impact even on people across the country. With cameraman Pawan Kumar in Kyiv, Ukraine, Gaurav Sawant for India Today.
It's a wrap on this bulletin from me, Chaiti Narula. For further news and updates, don't forget to log on to indiatoday.in or go ahead and download our app.